Hello and welcome back. In the previous lecture you learned how to modify the user height and the position of the A camera primitive. In this lecture we are going to further modify the virtual environment by loading and displaying 3D models, and I'm also going to show you how to troubleshoot some minor problems that you might have when reorganizing the files for your assets. So here, in the main folder of my project that you can download from this lecture, I currently have 2 HTML files and a dedicated folder that I'm going to use for all the assets, so images and 3D models, which at the moment contains the image that I'm using for the A-Sky primitive in our scene and that I've already preloaded in the asset management system. In my downloads folder, instead, I already have the zipped files of the 3D objects that I'm going to use in this lecture. I downloaded the first file, that is a castle scene created by Black Spire, from sketchfab.com, and the second file, that is a catapult created by Poly by Google from poly.google.com. You can find these links and many more in the resources section of the course. Okay, let's get started. In A-Frame, you can load and display 3D models using different file formats, such as GLTF, OBJ, and Collada. If you have some 3D modeling knowledge, you may already be familiar with them. And if not, don't worry, as I'll give you the most relevant pieces of information without going too much into detail. So, the first thing that I'm going to do is unzip the Castle Village file. That in this case is a GLTF file. And this file format is similar to Collada in terms of supported features, but it works with A-Frame more reliably because it's capable of compressing the size of 3D scenes and models. So the GLTF, which means a Graphics Library Transmission Format, works very well with web applications using a WebGL. If you like analogies, you can think of it as the equivalent of the JPEG file when it comes to converting images for use on the web. Okay, so the files that we need to move from here to our assets folder are scene.gltf, scene.bin, and the textures folder as well, which contains all the images that this 3D model uses for its textures. But they will be applied automatically, so you don't have to make any changes. I go back to our live preview now. And to preload the 3D model in the asset management system, this time I use the ASsetItem element. Then I give it an ID, village, and I search for the GLTF file in the assets folder. This is the only asset that you need to preload for the GLTF models, so you don't need to preload the bin file as well. And then, to add the Castle Village to our scene, I create an empty entity, I attach the GLTF model component to it, and I reference the 3D model by using its ID. And here it is. Well, this is worth entering VR mode to have a look at our scene. That is beautiful, I really like it. It makes me think of a role-playing game. And as you can see, this model by Black Spire has been created at a real-world site, so I don't need to scale it up or down. And this is quite evident if I move close to a door, because as you know, the user height value of the default A camera primitive is 1.6 meters, so this is the height of our eye level. Okay, I'm going to move the camera position to here, at the entrance of the village, so I exit VR mode and reload the page. Then I create the wrapper entity for the camera. I nest the camera primitive inside it. And I attach the position component to the wrapper entity, so I can move the camera back by modifying the z-axis value. 30, 40, and 50. And slightly to our left, so -1, -2, and -3 should be perfect. And now I'm going to add the catapult to our scene and place it here, beside the gate. So I go back to my downloads folder and unzip the file, that in this case is not a GLTF, but an OBJ file format. This type of a 3D model is quite common and reliable, and you can use it with no problems if you are using simple models with no animation. And here I mean importing animated models, for which the GLTF format is the way to go. Whereas applying animation in a frame to any object is a different matter, and we'll have a look at this later on in the course. So I'm going to move the OBJ file, the MTL file, and this image that the object uses as a texture to the assets folder. And when you use an OBJ 3D model, in the asset management system you need to preload both the OBJ and the MTL files, giving them their unique IDs. Therefore, a asset item element ID catapult-O, and in the assets folder I search for the OBJ file, and then a asset item element again ID catapult-M, and in the assets folder I search for the MTL file. We don't need to worry about the texture, so we can now add the 3D object to our scene. I go back to the live preview, and for the catapult I create an empty A entity to which I attach the OBJ model component. Then I use its OBJ property to reference the OBJ file using its ID. And as you can see, the catapult has just appeared on our scene at the origin point of 0, and is completely white because we still haven't provided it with information about its material. So semicolon, and then I add the MTL property to reference the MTL file using its ID. And the texture is finally been applied to the catapult. So we can now move it to this position. Which is going to be 50 on the z-axis. And well, catapults can be of any size, I guess, but I'm going to scale this down to half its size. So 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5, which is much better. And then I move it to the left-hand side of the gate. So -6, -9, and -10. And finally I change its direction, modifying the y-axis value in the rotation component. Let's say 200. Which looks okay. And now, to conclude this lecture, I change the camera position to 0, 25, and 100, and reload the page, so I can show you how to troubleshoot some minor problems that you might have with 3D models that don't show up as expected, especially after reorganizing your assets. I start with the castle village, And let's say that I'd like to rename the scene.gltf file to village.gltf to give the file name more affordance. If I reload the page, of course the 3D model is not showing up, because I need to update the file name in the asset management system as well. And when I reload the page again, the village is back. But what if you rename the bin file as well, which would make perfect sense? If I reload the page, indeed, we have the same problem again. Well, you can fix this by opening the gltf file in brackets. And as you can see, since the document contains thousands of lines of code, if you press Command F on a Macintosh or Ctrl F on Windows, or if you just open the Find pull-down menu in brackets, you can type here the name of the bin file, so scene.bin in this case. And again, you need to modify and update this file name accordingly, therefore village.bin. You can also search for the textures folder and update its name should you decide to change it as well. I go back to our scene, and then as soon as I save this file, if the live preview is running, the 3D model will show up. Otherwise, you can just reload the page. I close the gltf file, and now let's move on to the catapult, that is an OBJ file format. If I rename both the OBJ and the MTL files, and update the file names in brackets as well, and then reload the page, you can see that our catapult is still there. Even though the OBJ file, and I'll open it in brackets for you to see, is actually pointing to the old MTL file name. But in this case, and as long as you are displaying your model in a frame, it doesn't matter because we are telling the 3D model where to search for its MTL file in the asset management system. Instead, if you were using standalone 3D model viewers, you would need to modify that detail in the OBJ file as well. And I mean, update the file name accordingly. And as a last example, let's say that just like me, you like to keep your files and folders well organized. So you prefer to move the catapult's texture to the textures folder that contains all the other images. Well, obviously, if I reload the page, the catapult will display no textures now. And to get this sorted, you can open the MTL file in brackets and modify the path to the image that now is inside the textures folder. So you need to modify and update the path to textures / and file name. I go back to our live preview, and when I save the MTL file, our texture is being applied to the catapult as it should. So this is how you can load and display 3D models in a frame to further customize your scene and troubleshoot some minor problems when reorganizing your project files and folders, and I'll see you in the next lecture.